Hello, and welcome to the Washington Institute. I'm Rob Satloff, the Segal Executive Director of the Institute, and I'm delighted to have you join us for this very special event. It's trite to say it, but it is true. Those of us who witnessed the horror of October 7th 2 years ago had no idea that 2 years later, we would still be meeting to discuss the fate of hostages in Gaza, to be discussing the fate of the war that has taken so many innocent lives, the war that has upended uh, uh, conventional wisdom throughout the Middle East, that has affected through its tremors so many issues from Israel streaming out throughout the Middle East and indeed around the world. But yet, here we are today on the eve of the second anniversary of the horrific Hamas attack against southern communities in Israel. Are we on the verge of finally bringing this war to a close? Does the Trump peace plan hold the promise of the release of hostages and the beginning of a new phase for the people of Gaza? Or is this just another round of the tortuous negotiations, of the torturous path that was launched on October 7th? I am really delighted that we have four outstanding contributors to today's event. Joining us from Israel, from the United Arab Emirates, and here in Washington. Let me very briefly introduce them, and then we'll get to our conversation. From Israel, we have the author, columnist, great thinker about the fate of the Jewish people, Yossi Klein Halevi. I'm delighted to welcome you from Jerusalem. From Abu Dhabi, we're delighted to have Dr. Ali al-Nuaimi, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Interior Committee on the Federal National Council of the United Arab Emirates. Delighted to have you with us, Dr. Ali. And here in Washington, two of my colleagues. On my immediate left, Dana Stroul. Dana served in the Pentagon on October 7th and was a key player in her role as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East throughout the first year of the Gaza war. Delighted to have you with us now as the Director of Research here at the Washington Institute. And on my far left, Ambassador Dennis Ross. Dennis has been a key player in trying to think of the diplomatic alternative to war and what follows the conflict and the fighting in Gaza. Dennis, delighted that you're here this morning. So I first want to encourage everyone who's watching, if you want to get into our conversation, you have multiple ways. If you're watching on Zoom, please use the Q&A function of your Zoom bar to post a question. Or if you're on another platform, please send an email directly to me, rsatloff, RSATLOFF, at washingtoninstitute.org, and I'll do my best to bring your thoughts, your questions into the conversation. Let me first begin just with a brief question to all of our panelists. As we are meeting today on Monday, October 6th, negotiators are convening in Cairo, hopefully to translate the Trump peace plan into an implementation that would bring out the release of Israel's hostages and launch a ceasefire. As we start our conversation, tell me, are you optimistic? Are you hopeful? How do you feel about the prospects that finally we're on the brink of ending this war? Yossi?
So hello, everyone, and really delighted to be with all of you and my fellow panelists. It's really a pleasure. An Israeli is very reluctant to admit to optimism. It's always better to hedge your bets. But I realized today that this is the first time, maybe since October 7th, that when I think of the situation, I'm breathing, literally breathing. And so I suppose that that's the answer, is that I'm feeling hopeful.
Okay, very good. Dr. Ali.
Well, it's not an issue of being optimistic or helpful. I think it's a matter of responsibility that we all have to engage to end this and to work on the day after. So it's a commitment that we have to make, to engage actually to end the suffering of the people, the Israeli, the Palestinian, and to work on the day after.
Okay, thank you. Dana.
Pleasure to share the stage with such distinguished thinkers and analysts on these issues. On the one hand, I would say I'm optimistic because after 2 years, the entire world wants to see these hostages released and wants to see a pathway to end the war and continue to dismantle Hamas by means other than the military instrument. What's noteworthy to me about this moment in time is that so much of the Arab and Muslim world is aligned together with the United States and the Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu in support of this particular plan. So rather than work from the inside out, which is what we had in previous rounds of negotiations, where you had very quiet Qatari, Egyptian, Israeli, US negotiators trying to keep leaks out and then fill back and forth with Hamas responses. This time you have President Trump consistently using the power of Truth Social and social media platforms to continuously pressure Hamas. And the other remarkable element to me is the entrance of the Turkish government here. So in Doha and now in Cairo, it's not just Qatari and Egyptian pressure, it's also Turkish pressure. So the longtime hosts and those who have engaged with Hamas over the years are all aligned in pressuring Hamas. So it's an outside-in negotiation that's different from previous rounds. On the other side, though, I am breathing, as Yossi says, but I am skeptical. And the reason is, to me, it looks like the sticking points are back to the future, same old sticking points for Hamas, where there is a conditional yes, but it's always about the implementation details. To where will the IDF withdraw in Gaza? Can Hamas actually deliver all of the hostages, both living and dead? Because it always says at the end, it can't necessarily guarantee those who are held by non-Hamas terrorist groups. Which Palestinian prisoners held by Israel? On what exact timeline? Through what channels will assistance flow into Gaza? It's the same issues over and over. And I look at it and it looks to me like the same Hamas playbook.
Okay, thank you. Dennis.
I do agree that it's the same Hamas playbook, but I would also say that something is different. What is different is this convergence of broad interest, number one. And what is different is the level of American commitment and the readiness of this president, President Trump, to apply leverage, not just to Hamas, but clearly to Bibi as well. So what that does for me is create a sense that there is some momentum that there has not been before. I don't use the word optimism because optimism implies that things will always find a way of working out, and they don't. They have to be worked. I use the term hopeful because hopeful reflects a sense of possibility, and what there is today is a sense of possibility.
All right. Well, thank you all for laying the groundwork for this discussion. The purpose of today's event is not to relive the events of October 7th, 2023, but to assess where we are 2 years later. And to focus on that, I want to ask each of you a different question to get us going. Yossi, if the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, where are the people of Israel today, 2 years later? And how does this evolution affect your politics, affect your decision-making on the critical issues of peace and war?
So the Israeli collective never does denial. You know, when a tragedy happens, it's almost as if there's a part of the Israeli psyche that was waiting for this. Now, I don't think anyone was quite waiting for October 7th, But I didn't see any denial then, and we're certainly long past that stage. We are not in the acceptance stage yet either, because as long as the hostages are effectively still living in October 7th, Israeli society is in some sense stuck in October 7th as well. So the question then really is this mix in between these two poles of denial and acceptance. There's rage, there's what bargaining, there are all those are very much part of the mix, and in terms of how this is impacting on our politics, I used to feel that I understood and could reasonably predict where Israeli society was at, and to some extent where it might be going. To have the sense of public opinion, it doesn't feel stable anymore. This is a very volatile public, and I mean that especially politically. I'm thinking of two polls that I saw over the last couple of months. One poll showed something like 87% of Jewish Israelis supporting Trump's proposal, which it turns out was not a real proposal at all. It was just an off-the-cuff remark of helping the Palestinians emigrate. And 87% of Jewish Israelis said, yes, we support that position, without looking at the fine print, and really embracing a policy that, for me, is morally is horrifying. And that was on one end. Another poll that I saw showed that I think it was something like 60% or more of the public said that in the context of regional progress, and the emphasis was, the framework was the region, that a majority, even a strong majority, would be prepared to make some progress toward a solution to the Palestinian tragedy. Now, it was left deliberately vague, and I think by necessity, because right now there is very little support for a two-state solution. But even that, I would say, is not certain, because again, if the Saudis come into the Abraham Accords, the volatility of the Israeli public, the political unpredictability of the public might surprise us with another shift, and so there are really, I think, two takeaways for Israelis from October 7th. The first was there is no conceivable way that we will agree to a two-state solution. There's no way that we will import or take the risk of importing Gaza to the West Bank, which is, of course, our most sensitive border. That's one takeaway. The other takeaway, and this is my personal takeaway, is that Ariel Sharon was right. And October 7th proved that the Palestinians and the Israelis cannot live in one political entity between the river and the sea. And so, if anything, I'd say the future discourse, political discourse on the Palestinians will revolve around these two conclusions, these two opposing conclusions.
Fascinating. All right, thank you. We're going to hold that for now, and we'll come back to these issues later on. Ali, let me turn to you. October 7th happened 3 years into a peace relationship that your country built with Israel and that other countries around the Middle East built with Israel, the Abraham Accords. So much so that by the time of the Abraham Accords, more than half of all Arabs lived in countries at peace with Israel. Now, October 7th and the events of the last 2 years have certainly tested that commitment to peace. How would you assess its staying power 2 years after October 7th, 2 years into this war between Israel and Hamas?
Okay, thank you, Rob. First, the Abraham Accord was an agreement that signed by three countries, United States, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates. And, from the beginning, the UAE emphasized that this agreement, it's not a normalization. It is a full engagement. It is related to the integration of Israel within the region. It includes the people-to-people diplomacy, where Israeli, as a people, they will feel that they are respected, accepted as they are, and welcomed. And this is where, if you look at what's happening not only regionally but globally to the Israeli now, to date, every day there is 18 daily flights between the UAE and Israel till today, and all of them are full. You will not find a seat if you don't book it before 3 or 2 weeks. This is because the Israeli, they felt they are safe in the UAE. They felt that they are welcome, not only by the government, but the people. They feel that they are respected and accepted as they are. And this is the way we look at the Abraham Accord. We had so many issues with the current Israeli government that we disagree about. And many, the very traditional way to deal with this conflict in our region and globally is to withdraw the ambassador, close the embassy, cut relation. That's not the UAE way. What we believe in is the integration of Israel in the region that will bring security to Israel as a nation, to the Israeli people, and to also security for the whole region. This is where is our investment in the UAE. So it's very important to understand the angle that we deal with the Abraham Accord. It's more on people-to-people diplomacy. Even after the Abraham Accord, we try to make a balanced position, helping the Palestinian, standing with them, but at the same time, maintaining our relationship with the Israeli. I'm sorry, I lost my voice. So I think this is where we want everyone to stand, to understand the UAE position in this. We will continue our engagement with the Israeli people, regardless of what the relationship will end up with the government. The government will stay there for 2-3 years, but will change at the end. But the people are there. And this is where, our argument with our Israeli friend, that they have to make a choice. The security of Israel is a priority, not only for Israel, but for the whole region, because it's part of what the region needs, actually. So this is where they have to look into it. The security of Israel can be obtained through partnership, engagement, and building a relationship, especially through people-to-people.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're going to come back to the regional angle in just a few moments. Dana, let me turn to you. Now, the U.S.-Israel relationship over the last 2 years went through a phenomenal experience of stress and strain, politically, militarily, otherwise. Some aspects proved resilient, others less so. How is your view of this? What, in your view, proved really strong? What proved vulnerable? And how fixable are the problems that did emerge over these 2 years?
Thanks, Rob. Let me start by answering the resilience aspect. First, how the U.S. approaches its role in the region, which in my view remained remarkably resilient. First, it is important to remind everyone here that it was U.S. diplomacy that supported the original peace treaties between Israel and Egypt and Israel and Jordan. And then, as Dr. Ali noted, the United States played a key role in brokering the Abraham Accords, with the UAE as well as Bahrain and Morocco. So that US supported, US facilitated regional architecture has remained resilient. And it's not agreements that have been signed and then left on the table. There has been constant nurturing, tending to these agreements, facilitation, investment of US diplomacy, at times very significant commitments of US assistance to uphold the architecture of these agreements that have very much supported the security and stability of the region, as well as Israel's security. All of that actually remains resilient and intact today, which is quite remarkable given the strains that they've come under. Secondly, in terms of resilience, is the US Israel military relationship, which actually deepened after October 7th. So, of course, the US Israel relationship has been upheld by longstanding commitments of very significant US financial support, as well as bipartisan support. And in the post-October 7th period, and I should note before that, of course, Israel had moved from the European Command area of responsibility into the U.S. Central Command area of responsibility. And because of the Abraham Accords, the leadership, U.S. military leadership under U.S. CENTCOM, took an opportunity to really deepen those military ties and integrate Israel, increase intelligence sharing, security cooperation, planning for things like collective air defense against Iranian drones and missile attacks. All of this was happening before October 7th, but in the post-October 7th period actually accelerated, and the U.S. military deepened it. And finally, the kinds of tools that the U.S. government would bring to bear in a crisis situation like what Israel faced after October 7th, not only the seizure of over 200 hostages and the assault from Hamas, but also escalation from Hezbollah on the northern border, later escalation from Iran-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, escalation from the Houthis in Yemen, and then, of course, direct state-on-state attacks from Iran. In all of these cases, the U.S. military applied and actually increased its playbook of what it would do to support a partner in need. Flexibility in military posture, sending aircraft carriers, submarines, additional ballistic missile defense destroyers, supporting with accelerating munitions, both defensive and offensive, to Israel, at times actually emptying out its own military stocks to support Israel because our traditional system from defense industry wasn't going to meet Israel's need fast enough. And then, of course, the exceptional support from the executive branch, both the Biden White House and now the Trump White House. So the ways in which the United States would support a partner in need have actually been quite resilient over the course of the past 2 years. And those are the exact things that are vulnerable as well in the past 2 years. So first of all, I said that support for Israel has always been based on a foundation of bipartisan and, of course, congressional support. And that has proven very vulnerable in the post-October 7th period, with criticism of Israel's actions, both from the Democratic Party and from the Republican Party, at times where you can even hear voices on the far right and the far left sound very similar to each other in terms of questioning whether or not Israeli actions and the U.S.-Israeli relationship serve American security interests and American objectives in the Middle East. I think it's a real vulnerability to think about future presidential administrations, Republican or Democratic, and whether any president will be as supportive of Israel as President Trump or President Biden. That both for the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, these are the most pro-Israel presidents we will have, given the polling numbers and the suggestions that many Americans, and in particular the younger generations, are quite questioning of this relationship. And then in terms of U.S. tools are also vulnerable. So traditional forms of U.S. assistance very much on the chopping block in the current American political environment. Whether or not the U.S. will continue to support military sales to Israel is very vulnerable at this point, given congressional scrutiny of these sales. And of course, American diplomacy, I think, is vulnerable at this moment. We are at a point where across the region, there are not many Senate confirmed U.S. ambassadors across the State Department and other departments. We don't have the Senate confirmed officials needed to execute the kinds of very intensive U.S. leadership and diplomacy that will be needed in implementation should we get past this really critical window in Cairo. And finally, in terms of regional integration, the U.S. Approach to the Middle East in recent years has been premised on the notion that integrating partners, both Arab and Israel together and with the United States, serves the collective interest of all, and very much is a counter to the kinds of threats we saw Iran build across the region at this moment in time. And I think regional integration is also vulnerable at this moment in time because you do have partners questioning the Israeli strike on Hamas leadership in Doha, which many in the region don't see as a strike on Hamas, but as a strike on Qatar itself. And so whether or not integration with Israel enhances and upgrades the security of partners across the Middle East is something that will have to be addressed going forward. So finally, and very briefly, can it be repaired? I think it very much depends on the political leadership in Jerusalem, in Washington, and across the region. Yes, in my view, it can be repaired. If we have a promise of a political vision, meaningful delivery for a day after in Gaza, and Israeli leadership that discusses not just what's right for Israel, but what can also enhance the security of the Middle East, I think that is going to be very important. President Trump's consistent and sustained attention and investment in the whole Middle East file will be important, as well is courageous and necessary decisions by Arab leaders to not only put pressure on Hamas in Cairo in these coming days, but on delivering something meaningful for Palestinians and for Israelis, a stable and secure security outcome in Gaza and the West Bank.
Okay, thank you. Big agenda.
Big agenda.
So Dennis, let me turn to you. We've been talking since October 7th about trying to find a political end to this war. It has been a long and difficult process. Hopefully we're there. But how did we get there now? Why now? Why is this different than all previous efforts? And what is in the current effort that you see holding promise? What in the current effort do you see holding peril?
Thanks, Rob. That's obviously a fundamental question. I want to answer it by also explaining the backdrop here. If you take a look at the Trump plan, and specifically what is supposed to constitute the day after, all the elements of it have been developed going back to the Biden administration. There was an understanding, at least in discussions at that time, that number one, there should be, it's called now a board of peace, but it was considered there'd be a council. The council would be made up of people from the region, people internationally, whether it would be chaired by, it wasn't seen as being chaired by the US, but it was seen as being chaired by some sort of credible international figure. I think Tony Blair, even at that time, was considered to be the likely head of it. So there was the equivalent of the Board of Peace. In addition to the Board of Peace, there was the notion that there would be a day-to-day administration that would be essentially led by Palestinians who are technocratic, meaning they're not politically affiliated with Hamas or with Fatah or the PA. They might have someone who sits on this Board of Peace or the Council. They would be overseen by what we're talking now as being the Board of Peace, overseen, monitored, advised. There would be a stabilization force, an international regional stabilization force. And there was the premise that there would be reconstruction, but it would be based on demilitarization. And the logic of reconstruction for demilitarization was not a logic based on an argument. It was based on a fact. No one was going to invest in the reconstruction of Gaza if Hamas still had arms or if Hamas could reconstitute itself. The key to developing this plan was based on two premises. One, that Hamas had to be militarily defeated, which didn't mean eradicated, but militarily defeated. And two, there had to be an alternative to Hamas or you couldn't end the war. So all those elements have been part of a discussion going back to the end of the Biden administration. So why didn't we get there? One, there were questions raised, especially on the Israeli side, about minimizing, if not excluding, the PA from any role at all. On the Arab side, it's not that there was a consensus that the PA, as constituted, should be playing a role, but there was a consensus that the PA had to be doing the inviting. It either was the international community or the Palestinian Authority that would do the inviting. There was certainly on the part of the UAE, there was an emphasis on the need for reform of the PA. That, by the Israelis, wasn't considered to be an issue for them per se, but this issue of the role of the PA held things up. I would say what also held things up is that the Biden administration didn't push hard enough. It allowed too much discussion to take place purely on the role of the PA rather than sort of mandating effect. This is what the outcome is going to be, and then pressing each side to deal with that. That didn't happen. Now, when President Trump came in, you had the initial ceasefire that was agreed prior to his coming in, and I think he seemed to go along with it, but he also then basically accepted the reality when Prime Minister Netanyahu made the decision not to fulfill the second phase of what was the original ceasefire agreement. And increasingly, he seemed to believe that he would give Prime Minister Netanyahu a license to succeed militarily. I think what has happened now, given where we are, I think there's an element that he really is preoccupied with getting the hostages released. That seems to be something that is quite important to President Trump. But also, I would say, ultimately, he created the equivalent, or has come to the conclusion, that just like on milk cartons, there's a sell-by date. He came to a conclusion that there's a sell-by date on this conflict, and it has to end. And so what we have now is we have a peace plan. The fact that he's exerting the leverage is a huge distinction than from before, mostly because he has the leverage. We've seen that Prime Minister Netanyahu cannot say no to him. We've seen it several times now. Bibi said there was no starvation. President Trump said there's starvation. Suddenly, humanitarian assistance is going in. The 12-day war between Israel and Iran, the Iranians had one single missile that came after the ceasefire was supposed to be imposed. Israel had 50 aircraft in the air, very close to Iranian airspace. The president says, turn around, they turn around. The picture of the president handing the phone to Bibi to apologize to the Qataris, not long after Bibi had announced with great confidence that Israel would go anywhere, do anything, there would be no sanctuary. Well, it turns out for Hamas in Qatar, there is sanctuary because of what the president has done. So he has great leverage on Prime Minister Netanyahu, but he also has leverage, I think, on the key Arabs because they want this to end. One of the big differences is, and it starts with the Emirates, but it's not limited to the Emirates, they know the issue of the Palestinians can't be ignored. And they know that it intrudes on what is their agenda for what they want for the future. So they're ready to respond to the president, and that helps to explain why we're at a point that is much more hopeful than we've been before. But I think it still comes back to, A, the president has a great deal of leverage. B, so long as he's willing to exercise it, this process will go forward. And C, that means that he must continue to pay close attention to it and not lose interest in it.
Okay, very good. Lots of issues on the table. Let me ask a handful of questions, and then I'll turn to questions from people who are contacting me. Again, if you want to get into the conversation, either use the Q&A function of your Zoom bar or email me at rsatloff@washingtoninstitute.org. Yossi, when Prime Minister Netanyahu was in the White House last week and he endorsed the Trump peace plan, he said it would fulfill Israel's war aims and therefore he can support it. If the hostages come out, will this be viewed in Israel as victory? Will this validate the Israeli government's approach to using force for the last 2 years, and will it open the door to finally taking a close look at how Israel got here, something that has been postponed until after the war came to an end?
Yeah, I think all of the above, Rob. You know, and I had deep misgivings about the military moves in Gaza City. I came out publicly against it, and in retrospect, really thanks to President Trump's plan and Netanyahu's acceptance, whether willingly or through coercion, and I now justify that move as having contributed to applying pressure. I think it applied pressure on Hamas, certainly, and maybe on certain Arab leaders as well, to add a certain urgency to trying to end the war. So I think that, one of the questions, and it's already being asked now, because Netanyahu, as is his tendency, immediately took credit for this unprecedented victory before it's even happened. And I think we're really looking at a combination of factors. And this is really one of those moments where you could see different parts of Israeli society playing a crucial role, even though they were not working in tandem at all. In fact, they were working very much in opposition to each other. But the movement to prioritize the release of the hostages over the defeat of Hamas, which was really led by the hostage families, and which probably has the support of between 60 and 70% of the Israeli public at this point. That was not the case in the first year of the war, but it certainly is the case today. That movement, I think, played an essential role in enticing Trump to see himself as the protector, the savior of the hostages. And the hostage families really, I think, played this brilliantly. And through a combination of desperation and flattery, essentially told Trump, we don't trust our prime minister to prioritize the release of the hostages. We trust you. And that's been the consistent message of the movement to save the hostages. Our hope, the line in the Psalms, from where will our hope come? I look to the mountains. From where will our hope come? Well, we look to the White House. That was the message of the hostage families, and Trump embraced that. And so it was a combination of drawing Trump in to take a deeply personal interest in saving the hostages, along with Netanyahu's military pressure. And so these two forces, which really see each other not just in opposition, but in some sense really as being harmful to Israel's interests, I see that however unwillingly, these two forces played a very necessary symbiotic role in bringing us to this point.
All right, very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Ali. I want to scope out for a moment, talk about two of the most important regional ramifications of the last 2 years. I mean, on the one hand, we saw a huge shrinkage, a huge knock against Iran's regional threat network, Hezbollah, the demise of the Syrian regime, the takeout of Iran's nuclear facilities, etc. I mean, Iran clearly is much weaker today than it was on October 6th, 2023, something of great benefit to your country and to other Arab states in the region. At the same time, we just saw in the last few weeks the Israeli attack on Doha raise an alternative fear. Oh my gosh, what are the Israelis doing attacking a GCC country? What is the net balance here in terms of your national security? What do you what more do you fear? What more are you secure? When you look at the balance after 2 years, how better off are you?
Well, of course, first of all, let me put this statement. Hamas did the terrorist attack actually to stop the peace process in the region. And unfortunately, they did succeed to a certain extent in that. We believe that it's a shared responsibility for us to create security, stability, and prosperity for everyone in the region without excluding anyone, including the Palestinian, including the Syrian, the Lebanese, the Iranian, everyone. Because the region has suffered a lot. And, people in the region for decades, they have suffered. And what we believe in is this. Israel made a very successful, military success in dealing with Hezbollah, dealing with what's happening in Syria, in Iran, in many areas. But you have to cash that into a political achievement. If you don't do so, you will end up in a circle of wars, of conflict that does not end, and it will not bring security to Israel or to the region. And this is where it's very important now. We have to think as of today now that we have a huge opportunity by the engagement of President Trump to take a lead actually in first dealing with Gaza issue and later on with the peace process and expanding the Abraham Accord. And I think it's very important for the Israeli leadership to understand this and to take advantage of it. What the current government in Israel did, even himself, Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned it publicly, the isolation of Israel. It's not only the isolation of Israel, it's the impact on the Israeli people everywhere globally. They don't feel safe. They don't feel welcome, and the engagement of all Israeli, the private sector and the general public, regionally and globally, we need to look into it and see the impact of the narrative that coming from the Israeli government on them. This is where we in the UAE, we believe that we have to work on the Israeli general public, convince them that there is an opportunity now, an opportunity where to integrate Israel as a nation and also to build the bridges between the Israeli people, the Palestinian, the Arab, and the Muslim. And this is where, in the meeting, President Trump invited the Indonesian, the Pakistani, and the Turkey. It was, a smart engagement to look at this conflict. It's not Gaza, it's the whole region. And there is opportunity to look into it through an engagement of everyone without excluding anyone. And this is where, we don't want Israel to look at the region through the security angle, because that will change, the balance in the power will change. We want to see it through an angle of partnership and a shared responsibility to change the whole region, to build a region where everyone will feel secure, will enjoy peace, and will enjoy prosperity, including the Palestinian.
All right, thank you. So Dana, in all of our conversations so far this morning, we've been talking about a deeply engaged American role in the Middle East. rolling up its sleeves militarily, politically, diplomatically, in ways that one doesn't normally think of for this administration to get so deeply engaged in the Middle East. Now, you were involved in a deep American engagement, preparing the Arab-Israeli missile defense coalition that so effectively countered Iranian missiles and drones a year ago. When you look at how the administration is approaching national security issues writ large, globally, do you see us ready to stay so deeply engaged? Do you see us able to overcome whatever hesitations were built up by the Israeli attack on Doha? Do you see us ready to reconstruct that coalition? What is required in doing that?
It's a really important question. The short response is, I hope so. But let me speak as somebody who supported the key decision makers on the American side, which is when you think about how the American national security system works, you usually see pictures of the president or the national security advisor at the head of the table, surrounded by his and one day her cabinet level officials. What you rarely see are the people on the back wall. And those are actually the most important people in the room because they understand what the objectives, commitments, vision, and priorities of their bosses, the senior leaders, the decision makers are, and they implement. They're the ones that get into the details. And so a good example of this would be Iran negotiations, where it is incredibly important that one of the president's most trusted advisors, Steve Witkoff, was at one point sitting down in Oman with Iranian negotiators. But what's really important is what happens after the big guys are in the room, which is that the technical teams, the experts, the diplomats, the assistance professionals actually sit down and hammer out the details of whatever the political vision is. So when you look at the 20-point plan of President Trump, it was 21 points. And then exactly what happens in a lot of these things is that President Trump's advisors and Prime Minister Netanyahu's advisors got together the day before the big meeting and wound it down from 21 to 20 points and refined some of those points. And by the leaks, it looks like actually surprised many others across the region about how those points had changed. And this is where negotiations and implementation details matter. It cannot be just the president and his closest advisors. It cannot be the rulers of the region, and it cannot just be Prime Minister Netanyahu. It needs to be others, intelligence experts, security assistance professionals, all figuring out how this will exactly work. And in general, looking at the last 10 months of the Trump administration, what seems to happen is there are big moves, big decisions. A lot of times the implementers find out after, and everyone else is either rushing to catch up to understand what the president wants and how to achieve it, or reverse engineering US policy to meet the president's objectives. And if what this 20-point plan is going to work, it's going to take details and experts. A good example today is reports this morning are that Prime Minister Netanyahu's closest advisor, Ron Dermer, and President Trump's point guy, Steve Witkoff, are not going to sit down in Cairo today. They're going to wait and see how far we can get in some of the details, because again, it's these details of to where does the IDF withdraw, which Palestinian prisoners can we relocate? Can we locate all of the Israeli hostages being held by Hamas all over Gaza? It's those implementation details that matter and frequently trip up whatever the big objective is. So here going forward, I certainly hope that President Trump has consistency in prioritizing this. I think we saw shortly after his inauguration in January that he was very focused on securing the release of the hostages, and his team accomplished the release of one, an Israeli American citizen. And then for several months this year, this hasn't been President Trump's highest foreign policy priority. He's been focused on other things. And now, once again, he is seized with hostage release in Gaza. So everyone who's committed to this issue should galvanize the support that we have from President Trump and the attention at this moment in time to not just get to the broad agreement on the political vision and the broad agreement on the 20 points, but get as much momentum going on the implementation details. This is what is going to trip this up. Who is going to be part? Which countries are going to contribute to this international security stabilization force in Gaza? That is going to be important. Exactly what Palestinians are going to meet the objectives of all the different parties for a technocratic committee, that is going to be important. Exactly what timeline will the IDF actually withdraw to what places in Gaza? That is going to be an important detail. There is a lot of reference to distributing humanitarian aid through the United Nations system. This has been a core area of concern and resistance from Israel because the view is that there is significant leakage through that system to Hamas. This takes detailed implementation work, and it's going to take President Trump empowering a team much broader than Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to get those details done.
Well, focusing on these details for a minute, Dennis, if we take Yossi's point a few moments ago that the president seems to have embraced the idea of liberating hostages, what is the possibility that the hostages come out, but yet the war doesn't actually end? Or another way of putting this is, among those other 20 points beyond the release of the hostages, which are really quicksand, which hold the greatest likelihood for undermining the prospects of real peace?
So Dana put her finger on a lot of the elements of quicksand. I'll put it this way. In answer to your question, I think there is momentum right now to get the hostages released. The exact number of Palestinian prisoners, who they are, that is one of the details that has to be sorted out. But I think there is great momentum for that. The point of greatest potential difficulty is going to be the issue of disarmament or demilitarization and how it is to be done. If you looked at the original 21 points, disarmament was there, but it was vague. And if it was going to take place at all, it was going to take place gradually. And it might involve the Hamas turning over weapons, heavy weapons, to the Egyptians or to the international stabilization force in some fashion. None of that was spelled out beyond that. Even in the 20 points, which became more specific in terms of spelling out disarmament, having monitors oversee it, having timelines connected to it, and having that be the key to driving what would be Israeli withdrawal, all that has to be sorted out. So if you take a look now, disarmament and Israeli withdrawal are, from the Israeli standpoint, completely interconnected. Hamas, having given up the hostages, will have also given up what is their major leverage. The countervailing leverage, though, will be the Arabs working on President Trump. I think one of the issues that has been tremendously overlooked, when President Trump met with the mix of Arab and Muslim leaders and foreign ministers, they came in, they were very explicit, no annexation in the West Bank, which he agrees to and then announces the next day. They were also basically saying, we're prepared to accept your 21 points. They have the potential to influence President Trump. That's very clear. One sign of how much some of them can influence him, it's not only that he produced the apology, direct apology from the prime minister to the country prime minister, it's also that he signed out an executive order in which he has now committed the United States to the defense, including the use of military forces of Qatar against any attack. That's unprecedented. And that's been done. And it shows the ability of the Arabs, certainly Arab leaders with whom the president values his relationship. It shows their ability to get him to continue to take steps. So the quicksand is there in terms of really difficult issues that have to be sorted out. There will be a very strong impulse on Prime Minister Netanyahu's side to hold very firm to the issue of disarmament. But you're also going to see, I think, pressure coming from Arab leaders to see this through, and the extent to which the president, who clearly covets getting the Nobel Prize, understands that getting the Nobel Prize may be tied up with fully implementing all of this. That may give him the incentive to maintain his focus on it and to do what Dana was suggesting, to ensure that there is a team of technical people who can sort out what are these profoundly difficult problems, which, by the way, are not only disarmament, not only humanitarian assistance, they do relate to the issue of withdrawal. They do relate to who will define in the 20 points. Israel does get out of Gaza completely, but there are 3 phases of withdrawal, and the 3 phases of withdrawal are to a buffer zone along the border within Gaza. But it then says, once it becomes clear that there's no longer a terror threat being posed out of Gaza, Israel will withdraw completely. Working through all of that will take, I think, not only a level of energy and intensity, but also some imagination.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. All right. I have a long list of questions that have been sent in. I'm going to try to package some of these and pose them quickly to members of our panel. Yossi,
Rob, can I comment on what Ambassador just mentioned?
Sure, please go ahead,
okay.
Dr. Ali.
You see, it's very important to understand that the issue of disarming Hamas and making sure that Hamas have no role in Gaza is not an Israeli demand now anymore. It's part of many Arab countries' demand. And this is part of the commitment that they made during the meeting with the President Trump in New York, and also through the declaration that was done for the 2-state solution at the United Nations, which was supported by 142 countries that include the disarming of Hamas. So it's very important, to state this. This is not an Israeli demand anymore. It's more than that. It's a necessity for the security, stability of the whole region. And this is where we have to work together, especially in dealing with the general public, not only in Israel, but in the region. That this is a necessity from the Arab leaders' point of view also. Thank you.
So this actually raises one of the questions that I received, Dr. Ali. Let me ask you then, at what point can you conceive of Arab forces actually being deployed inside Gaza? Will they be deployed to protect civilians? Will they be deployed to disarm Hamas if Hamas proves unwilling to give up their weapons themselves? How do you see this process of the deployment of Arab and Muslim forces actually happening?
Okay, first of all, there's about 5,000 Palestinians from Gaza that have been trained and ready to engage in Egypt, and they will take the responsibility of the local security within the Palestinian community. There is another group, they started training them from Palestinian also in Jordan. I think it's time to let the Palestinian deal with this issue with the support, financial, equipment, engagement, political support. But I think there is an understanding now within the Palestinian community, especially in Gaza, that Hamas has no role in the future. Hamas is responsible to what they're suffering now. So I think the issue of the Arab forces or the Arab Muslim European forces is related to the protecting, the borders, the issue with Rafah, with Egypt, the other with the Israeli, but not to control the local community or manage the security within the local community. This should be left to the Palestinian, and they are willing to engage, but we have to let them take a lead, and give them the right support.
Okay, very interesting.
Comment on that?
Go ahead, Dennis.
The point you made, Dr. Ali, is very important, but I'd also say one of the failings of the Israeli military strategy is that it was not about protecting the Palestinian population. Because it wasn't about protecting the Palestinian population, it meant that they were continually subjected to the coercion and intimidation and use of force by Hamas against them. It is essential in this next phase that there is protection of the Palestinian population. Whether these 5,000 Palestinian security forces who will go in will be sufficient for that, or whether they need to be backed up so it becomes clear there is protection, that's a key, because if there is, then you will see the profound alienation of the Palestinian population in Gaza will be turned against Hamas. Hamas itself, under those circumstances, has no interest in resisting at that point. So a key becomes their protection.
I agree.
Yossi, I hate to ask you to look into the crystal ball, but I'm going to do it anyway. If we all wake up in a week or so and the hostages are released, beyond it being a day of great celebration and relief, will it also mark? Will the clock start ticking on this government in Israel, and will this likely bring about a new election sometime early in 2026?
I think that the odds are better than even for two reasons. One is because of Netanyahu's far-right partners, who are already looking toward elections and are already trying to position themselves. And there will be a minority of Israelis. How many? Is it 25%, 30%? That may be too high or not. Who will see this as a disappointment, if not a defeat, because I think that it's fair to say that we're not going to get everything that Netanyahu is promising us. Once, as we've heard on the panel, once we start getting into the details, the process is going to get more complicated, and there will be a minority, perhaps a significant minority of the Israeli public, who will feel betrayed. And so the far right, the two leaders of the far right, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, will be positioning themselves against Netanyahu, and Netanyahu himself will try to, of course, turn this into, if not a full victory, a three-quarters victory, which I think a majority of the Israeli public will be satisfied with. And so that's so the first reason really is the dynamics, the political dynamics with the far right. And the second is that Netanyahu, I think, will be very keen to run as soon as possible after the hostages are back. This is as good as it's going to get for him. And from speaking to people in the last couple of days, I was frankly surprised and if I can admit, a little depressed to hear how people were just giving Netanyahu the credit for the breakthrough. I personally don't think that he would have stopped the war if Trump hadn't coerced him to. I don't think he had an exit strategy, but Trump has given him an out. And there are many people here, and Netanyahu, with his finely tuned political sense, knows this. Many people who will say, well, the magician has done it again. And so I think that for both negative reasons, which is the possible collapse of his coalition, and from his perspective, positive reasons, Netanyahu will move toward elections.
Um, uh, and I'm reading between the lines of your remarks by saying there's a reasonable chance he may come out on top.
I can't allow myself to go there. And now I'm stepping out of the pretend objective analyst role, and just saying Israel will not begin the process of healing before this government goes. And so for me, it's inconceivable that after an 18-year run, which is longer than most of the ancient kings of Israel served, someone actually did the biblical research, that Netanyahu will get another term. If I could just add one point, I'd like to say something to Dr. Ali, which is that what you said here today, my Israeli soul is hungry for. And when you said that Arab leaders need to speak to the Israeli public, that has to be built in to the morning after strategy. And not to wait. We need to hear this immediately. Israelis need to understand the opportunity that we have, because we kind of know, yes, the Abraham Accords have held, sort of, but Israelis haven't been paying attention. And look, the fact that and you mentioned this, it's not only our Abraham Accord partners who didn't shut their embassies over the last 2 years. Egypt and Jordan didn't either. And I think this is the first conflict since we've had peace with them where they didn't demonstratively shut their embassy. If I'm not mistaken, Dennis, please correct me. But my sense is that this is the first conflict where all of the countries, the Arab countries that have made peace with Israel, have kept their embassies open. And this is something that Israelis have not internalized. This needs to be made explicit for the Israeli public. And in terms of the Palestinians, the public is not ready to hear about a two-state solution. We need baby steps. But what I believe we need to do is start making a conceptual shift away from annexation toward the possibility of some, and I'm using very cautious language, some kind of an arrangement with the Palestinians within a regional framework that will move us in a different direction. And hopefully, in the long term, toward a two-state solution. But this is the kind of language that we need to hear from our Arab partners.
Terrific. Very good. Thank you. Dana, we're coming to the close of our event. Let me ask you, what do you think the implications would be here in the U.S. political environment if the hostages got released? How would that affect many of the trends you referred to earlier that were potentially negative in the U.S.-Israel relationship and the discussion around that?
I think it would be a significant opening. So Yossi spoke about the real brilliant strategy of the hostage families and forum to engage with President Trump very closely. They have also, in my view, done a very excellent job of being present across the political spectrum here in Washington, D.C. When they come to the White House, they also meet with members of Congress, and this issue is very much still alive. And when members of Congress speak about a need to end the military part of this campaign in Gaza, and as Dr. Ali talked about, moving to political process and political vision, that's where members of Congress are as well. They talk about release of hostages and a need for Hamas to disarm and there to be no possibility of Hamas reconstituting. And part of that, of course, begins with the release of hostages. But I think whether or not that we can turn the page and start to rebuild the support very much will depend on the tune and the mood music coming out of Israel. Right now, statements like October 7th would not have happened if President Trump were the president at that time are really not helpful here for the kinds of bipartisan support that have been critical for supporting Israel and also critical for a robust U.S. leadership role in the region. And here again, when we talk about Arab leaders speaking to the Israeli people, I also think there's a critical role here for Arab governments with members of Congress. Arab leadership, especially given the significant, exactly what you all were talking about, the ability and the commitment to maintain dialogue with Israel, the demonstration of commitment to regional security by participating in air defense coalitions, the commitment to coming to Cairo, meeting with President Trump at the UN, all of these things are actually areas where members of Congress have together expressed bipartisan support. So I think it's a key opening. Let me say one thing about what we were talking about before. I think an overlooked point of the 20-point plan is probably point 19 or 20, which talks about an interfaith dialogue that the U.S. commits to facilitate between Palestinians and Israelis. And I think it's very important, but I am concerned because I don't think the core of this is a religious issue. I think it's different than that, and that might, if the frame is only about religious dialogue and interfaith dialogue, that misses some of the bigger issues here. So in what Dr. Ali and what Yossi are speaking about, which is a conceptual shift, an arrangement with Palestinians within a regional framework, that should really be the focus of the dialogue. And there are so many organizations, civil society organizations, also government-led efforts. And of course, Dr. Ali has been a key part of this in the UAE. There are so many ways in which this could be a multi-dimensional dialogue that must be part of the day after and the post-October 7th framework. But if we constrain ourselves only to interfaith dialogue, I think that will miss some of the key elements of that confidence building, trust building, and people to people ties that will be so necessary as we move to the day after.
Okay, thank you.
Rob, can I comment?
Sure, go ahead, Ali.
On this item number 19. You know, I think it's very important to engage faith leaders. It's not to let them play a role as politicians or talk about politics, but I think they have a role to play. And, you know, on October 7th, we decided in the UAE to engage immediately with faith leaders, especially the far-right rabbis in Israel, because Hamas called their operation Al-Aqsa Flood, and they wanted to drag us, all of us, to a religious war in Al-Aqsa and make sure that the center of this conflict is not Gaza, but Al-Aqsa. And this is where I started engaging with the far-right rabbi, that, you know, where some of them were, you know, sanctioned by United States. But, you know, because we believe in dialogue, I engaged with them. I brought some of them to the UAE. I went to Israel and met them over there. But they did play a role, actually, in protecting Al-Aqsa from being part of this conflict. And, you know, I think it's very important to distinguish between their role as faith leader to promote the narrative of coexistence, of peace within their follower, and that being a politician. We don't want them to play a political role, but we want them to promote the peace value, the humanitarian values that we share actually together within their followers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ali. Dennis, a final word. I think it's fair to say that you haven't been the biggest cheerleader for President Trump's foreign policy in general. Is he getting this one right?
Yes, he's getting this one right. He has used the power of the office and the leverage that he has. I would have liked to have seen it applied earlier because I think we would have seen results much earlier, but it's better that it's taking place now. I'm going to just add a thought, which goes beyond this. Israel was phenomenally successful militarily in a way that left many in the Arab world literally in awe. Dr. Ali said it before, But he said, but we didn't see the strategy for political achievement. The truth is, Israel has won a war and transformed the region fundamentally in terms of the balance of power, but it has lost the political war. And getting to the issues that Yossi was raising, the current Israeli government cannot recoup. There will have to be a change. Now, that there's a lot of different ways that government could be made up, but the government has to be a change because Israel will have to do a very determined effort to try to change the perception of Israel throughout the world. When you look at the scope of the demonstrations throughout Europe that are anti-Israeli, that don't include, that include broad segments of society, Israel has a lot of work to do. An election that is coming can be part of telling people, look, the potential for change is coming as well. In the end, it still comes back to the essence of your question. President Trump will have to see this through. And if he does see it through, and we see the beginning of a real pathway towards peace, by the way, point 19 talks about reform in the Palestinian Authority, paving the pathway to self-determination and Palestinian statehood. Even if the Israeli public isn't ready for Palestinian statehood, it is baked into this approach. So the potential for change is there, but it will require the kind of follow through from the president that hasn't necessarily been the hallmark of the administration.
Okay, terrific. I'm very grateful for these four thoughtful contributors to today's discussion. I wish we could go on further, but I'm going to say thank you to you all. Yossi Klein Halevi in Jerusalem, Dr. Ali al-Nuaimi in Abu Dhabi, Dana Stroul and Dennis Ross here in Washington. Thank you all very much for joining us on this, the eve of the second anniversary of the October 7th attacks, and perhaps, just perhaps, the eve, more or less, of a breakthrough that might lead to freedom for the hostages and an end to this horrific war. Thank you for joining us today at the Washington Institute.